Yo, Gersonzero here. Okay, so I usually don't make gaming news videos, but I felt like I had to put my 2 cents in here. So, recently, Square Enix announced that Final Fantasy VII is going to be an episodic game, which is whatever, right? I don't really care for that. As long as it's done well, it's done well, right? But I feel like at this point in time, there's enough information on Final Fantasy VII Remake to raise flags. I feel like there's a lot of things with this game that can go wrong. And let me tell you this right now. I grew up with Final Fantasy VII. It was the first RPG, like many people over here on YouTube, that was the first RPG I completed. You know, I have strong ties to that game, Yeah, I consider it to be one of the best PlayStation 1 games of all time, and I also consider it to be the best RPG on the PlayStation 1. So Final Fantasy VII, we get a trailer on the PlayStation Experience conference that reveals the game is going to be an action RPG. And this is where I have a problem with the game. On top of the episodic stuff. I was talking to my brother about it, and I said, I gotta make a video about this, because maybe I'm not the only one thinking this, and maybe in the comment section you guys can help me help me with my worries, because it's a little alarming. So this is the thing. Final Fantasy VII is a pretty huge game. You don't really get RPGs with the scope of Final Fantasy VII. It just doesn't happen. Like it's just not there. You start off in the city, Midgar, and Midgar is freaking humongous, right? You can't explore all of Midgar, but they're there for a few hours before you enter the world map. Now, me experiencing Final Fantasy VII as my first RPG, I didn't realize that world maps were a thing in RPGs, because I never owned the Super Nintendo. And I never really got into those RPGs until the emulation days, which was, for me at least, during the Dreamcast era. So during that time, I was already well aware of world maps. So Final Fantasy VI, I'd never touched it. Chrono Trigger, never touched it. So it was new to me. So you don't get world maps the size of Final Fantasy VII today. You don't get airships, submarines, gold chocobos that go across mountains. You don't get a bunch of mini games that are in gold saucer. You don't get this crazy bad guy that they're chasing throughout the entire game that makes you travel their entire world. You're traveling the entire world of Final Fantasy VII. Like, by the time you beat the game, as long as you're going for 100%, you've seen every inch of that world. Like, you actually memorize the continents that it has. It's crazy. So you don't really get that today. So it being an action RPG, right, it starts to dumb a lot of things down, right? And it goes beyond the combat to me. I'll explain in a bit. So this is the thing. When people are upset because it's not a turn-based RPG for many reasons, and it being an action RPG, it messes up the materia system. There's materia in that game that is built around the game being a turn-based game. Like how are they gonna work materias that are linked with all, or like, for instance, like there's materia that when you link it with the final materia, like Phoenix, how is that gonna work? Like, it's an action RPG. Does that mean that you don't have direct control over everyone else? And the boss battles. There's huge bosses in Final Fantasy VII. How is that going to work? How are you going to fight? How are you going to fight the weapons? The weapon that's underwater. How is that going to look in an action RPG? Like, it looks pretty stupid. I forgot which boss was it. It wasn't Emerald. And no, it was Emerald weapon. Because I think Diamond is part of the story. Then it's Emerald and Ruby weapon. So Emerald weapon is the one on the ground, in the water. How is it going to look? You're telling me The Final Fantasy VII Remake is going to have a submarine that you can travel under, which is its own world. And you're going to run into Emerald Weapon, and you're going to be swimming, fighting him as an action RPG. It just doesn't make sense. Like, how is that going to work? Are there going to be different, like, can you like elevate, or like, are there going to be different planes that you can go to as you're fighting him? And then what happens when you fight Ruby? Are you only gonna fight his feet? Like, that's the thing about action RPGs. Like, they can look pretty stupid. Now, don't get me wrong. When you're playing a turn-based RPG, it looks stupid. Because when you're fighting Emerald Weapon and you're underwater, it looks stupid that Cloud, Barret, and Red 13 are standing in the bottom of the ocean doing their normal attacks. It looks pretty ridiculous. But it makes more sense than them swimming and slashing. It's just not gonna look good. And what's gonna happen when you fight Genova? And Genova has weird feet. You're telling me that you're gonna be on the floor slashing her and cutting her feet like it's Dragon Age Inquisition? Because Dragon Age Inquisition looks fucking stupid when you're fighting huge bosses, okay? It looks pretty dumb when you're fighting dragons. At least with Dragon's Dogma, the combat system is ridiculous, so it looks amazing. But Final Fantasy VII is not going to have a climbing system or animations like Dragon's Dogma did. So how is it going to look? Is this Final Fantasy VII Cut Feet Edition? Because that's just what it's looking like so far. And going back to the materia system, are the materias going to be now like perks? Because the materia is not going to be removed because it's part of the story. But how is it going to, like, that game has a massive, complex materia system. How is it going to work? How are limits going to work? I just don't understand how a limit's going to work. Like, I'm pretty sure Omni Slash is not going to be as epic as it was during the time of PlayStation 1. Like, the PlayStation 1 was basically a cutscene. If they're gonna make it an action RPG, I don't know, I'm just a little concerned about how it's gonna look. And another thing, a dungeon that would normally take maybe, let's say, 30 minutes to get from one area to the other, not the entire dungeon, let's say a room. Let's say we have a room that takes 15 minutes to get through from point A to point B. Let me give you the perfect example. What is the name of it? The train graveyard in Final Fantasy VII. I consider it to be a dungeon because you're going into random battles. When I say a dungeon, I don't mean a cave you go into and it has different levels. No, I'm not talking about like Zelda. I'm talking about the modern dungeons that Final Fantasy VII introduced. So the Shinra building is a dungeon, okay? Let's be serious here. So let's say you have the train graveyard. You're going from point A to point B. You're getting into random battles. So it's going to take you maybe 15-20 minutes to get through that screen, right? It's a pretty long screen too. Now that it's an action RPG, I don't know how they're going to do it. I don't know if they're going to do the Kingdom Hearts where you're running and then the enemies just come out of nowhere, or you run into the enemies like Tails and then you get into the random battle. It's not going to take as long as it did during the original game, because A, the fights aren't going to be as long because it's an action RPG, and there's no transition, right? Assuming there's no transition. So a room that would take 15 minutes to get through is going to take 5 minutes, maybe less, probably not. But now that that's taking place, you could say the same thing about the game. You can say that the game, assuming that they don't redesign all the dungeons or remove dungeons, is going to be a third of the length that the original game was. And that's, I mean, as long as the dungeons themselves and the maps are one for one, I'm okay with that personally. But I don't feel like they're going to do that. And that's the problem that I have with the game. And now that it's episodic, that's a problem, because are we going to get a Sparks Notes version of the game story where they're going to remove certain parts from the game? Do you remember when there's this part of the game, I don't remember the name of the town, but you're playing a strategy game to win the war. And if you lose, you get kicked out. And then you remove the rope and you don't go back into it. Are they going to remove stuff like that? Because that's kind of filler. Alright, let's be serious. It's pretty filler. Are they going to remove stuff like that? How are they going to introduce Yuffie? Is it going to be in the same way? How is that going to be? You know, because Yuffie and Vincent were optional characters. You know, they're not characters that can join you through the story. You know, you run into Yuffie, she steals your stuff, right? And you're gonna run into her again eventually. But she's not a character that you can get. That's not a mandatory character. It's optional because they're in the international version of the game. But you know, they ended up making them canon because they are advent children. I don't know. I'm just a little concerned because, you know, are we gonna get 12 episodes of the game and the game is gonna end up costing $120? Maybe more. You know, are they doing this because they assume that they can release? They're not gonna do 3 episodes where each episode is per disc. They're not gonna do that. I think the reason why Square Enix is doing this is because they're trying to take advantage of this Final Fantasy VII hype train right now. So I think what's happening is they're going to release the episodic version of the game where maybe it's 2 hours, right? Maybe 2 hours a game, right? And let's say you start the game and then it ends where you're going on your first mission with Tifa, right? Right, or you maybe the first episode ends when you meet Aerith, right? And then it's going to give them time to continue developing the other episodes as you go on. So I'm guessing they're doing that. That way you can play the game earlier than anything else. So I think that's why they're doing it. But the thing that killed me was that they said it's going to have different gameplay styles each freaking episodes. So you're telling me that one episode is going to be a action RPG and the other one's going to be a turn-based RPG? Look, you're telling me that maybe leveling doesn't even exist in this game? It's possible. It's possible because it's episodic. That you could download episode 8, assuming they do that many, episode 8, now have a save file, and continue to play the game. That's going to be crazy, man. I don't know. I feel like they're going to make the game so not an RPG that we're just going to go in for the story, I think. Which, again, as long as the story is 1 for 1, I don't care. I'm okay with that. You know, like, at that point, I'm just going to be happy seeing Final Fantasy VII completely remade 1 for 1. I'm okay with that. But when you start to do a bullet points version of Final Fantasy VII rather than the whole game in its entirety, I don't know, man. I don't know how that's going to work. And don't freaking link Crisis Core and that Gersonzero crap into the story. Alright, because I hate those 2 games. So don't do it. So that's really it, guys. You know, like, those are the main concerns I have with the game. Is it going to be Final Fantasy VII, the Feet Cutter Edition, right? Is it going to be the Sparks Notes, bullet points version of Final Fantasy VII storyline? And are they going to dumb down the hell out of the dungeons? Because if it's not, oh my god, I'm telling you, man, I'm just so scared for the game. I don't know what to think anymore at this point, so I need to know what you guys think. I'm gonna end the video here because that was just something that's lingering in my mind right now. Game looks absolutely beautiful, you know, but at this point, I don't even think we're gonna get a physical copy of the game. Like, I'm predicting there's gonna be like 12 episodes. I'm being dead serious because that game is just so massive in scope that I don't think it's gonna be a full-on RPG. I think it's just gonna be a game with story with RPG elements, and that's it. I'm in the video here, guys. Later. Let me know what you think in the comment section if you agree or you're excited for the game, because I'm getting it regardless because I gotta jump in and see what's all about. Later.